Sydney, Australia. My name's H.Y. William Chan, and I'm an architect and also a recovering politician, having served for City Hall in Sydney in Australia with the Lord Mayor's team, and have been looking at how we shape and design our future cities around the world, ones which are inclusive and future focused. This is a final session for today at the Impacts Economy stage here, and we're very glad that you can join us. Today's topic for the final session is, can capitalism serve our communities, and our new playbook for doing so. Now I'd like to welcome, we have Charlotte Massey here joining us, one of our fellow listers. Charlotte's the co-founder of the Chamber of Connection. I know, having worked in public office and having dealt with a lot of business groups, chambers of commerce, connection is a different way of seeing the economy. Tell us more about how you decided to create a group focused not just on business, but connection.
Yes, absolutely. The Chamber of Commerce has done a really amazing job building our society around commerce and business. And what we realized is that we also need a similar structure to make sure that we have connection in our lives. In 2023, the US Surgeon General declared an epidemic of loneliness. And in that report, shared that the health impact of loneliness is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day on our physical health. And we know that 52% of people in the US are at risk of social isolation. And so this is a major problem. It's a health problem, and it's also a problem in us being able to have a functioning democracy, because we're becoming disconnected. We're not trusting each other. And without trust, we can't function as a society. So we need structural change. We need national infrastructure. And we also need infrastructure at the city level and at the community level if we're going to be able to reverse this decline and get our society back to a place where we can function and have the physical and mental health that we need from being in community with each other.
We've seen over the past decades how capitalism is scaling in terms of a very globalized way. But at the same time, for the next decades to come, I think it's important that we actually look at how we use that vehicle, the systems, to actually serve our communities. So a lot of what I've been working on has been looking at shifting from a capitalistic mindset and looking at how to move it and shifting it from scaling to serving. And that's something that's comes about in terms of our local communities, because it is actually at the local scale where that impact happens, where the solutions are actually grounded based on a bottom-up approach of really understanding our needs that's happening in our cities. And I think tackling loneliness and having better community connections, that's something that actually needs to come from our people. And as our communities evolve, so do the governance, so do our politics and the politicians making decisions. And that's something that I took on, being the youngest to be elected to government for Sydney in 180 years, the youngest ever. But that was a scary journey to be on. But I had the backing of the community in terms of credibility. One of the big pieces that we did to identify these kind of big social issues to tackle is to actually listen to the people. We're potentially making my role as a politician redundant, and how do we make sure citizens are at that table making decisions? So for Sydney, we ran a citizens jury or a citizens assembly. In other parts of the world, they actually use this for budgeting purposes, where everyday people randomly selected, or everyone in a democratic way, gets to spend the city's money and use it in a meaningful way in terms of what's being prioritized. What have you found in terms of your own city and kind of looking at democracy in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to have a grassroots approach to community building. And at the same time, we need to have that infrastructure so that all of the grassroots wins that are happening can be shared, and we can celebrate the people who are building community the same way that we celebrate entrepreneurs and the same way that we celebrate people who are building businesses. Right now, there is a lack of funding and a lack of infrastructure for celebrating those wins. And we're not able to share the learnings and really share the playbook of what's working because it's all happening at a really small scale and without a lot of visibility and a lot of funding. And so we need both. We also need partnership. So we need to have people who are embedded in the community, who are on the ground, who know what their communities need and have been part of the community for a long time and have that trust. And we also need to get our governments involved, and we need to get our companies involved. Because there's a lot of power in the platform that major companies have, and there's a lot of opportunity to unlock scale. So for example, we have a partnership with the Seattle Kraken, which is the NHL team, and we hosted the nation's first newcomer game, which is a game celebrating people who have recently moved to the city who are looking to build connection. And it was sponsored by Alaska Airlines. So by getting two really major regional brands together to bring people together and be in community, we're able to unlock access that we would never have been able to do at a grassroots level. And we're able to shine a light on the amazing people who are building at the grassroots level. So we have a partnership with news stations to celebrate people who are building communities once a month on live television. And that's something that they would not otherwise be able to access. And now because we're coming together as a chamber, we're able to build something that is better for all of us than any of us could do by ourselves.
One of the ways I've had a look at how to really create these partnerships and really shift the understanding of having shareholders, but using the community as shareholders rather than just only stakeholders. I think that's a really important way of reframing and adding that to the playbook. But what I've done is, since being elected, is to really take that mandate of what citizens have decided, which were the top 10 priorities for Sydney for 2050. And I actually had put next to the spare chair in the council chambers, on the back of the chair, a label that actually says Citizen of 2050. And that was a physical but also metaphorical reminder for me that as somebody who's been given the privilege to have a seat at the table making decisions, that I also need to be pushing and advocating for the mandates that of the community needs to create that impact that our citizens have said that they want for 2050. So it's a reminder that I'm not making decisions for now. I'm not making decisions for my own interests. But how do we start thinking about others? How might we actually start thinking longer term to act on the behalf of people who will occupy the spaces in our cities in the future, those who might not even be born yet? In that chair, I also invite our community members in advisory panels, in consultations, to also occupy that space so that they physically also have a seat at the table and make those decisions from a future perspective. I think these kind of needs in terms of quantifying impact and actually valuing the difference that can be made, that comes down to what people are actually experiencing. While policies are important, and these partnerships, public-private, working with big companies but also small businesses in the local communities. But it's actually about how do we measure that impact.
Absolutely, and that's something that's really important about social connection. Right now, social connection is not seen as a cause area the way that education is a cause or climate is a cause. And so there aren't major foundations that are set up focused on rebuilding our social fabric and targeting the loneliness epidemic. And we need that to change, and we need it to change rapidly, because if we can't trust each other, we're not going to be able to come together and solve all of the other critical problems that we're facing as a country and as a world. And we also need it to be measurable, right? Like, we all know that we need to have more connection. We see the social shift of nostalgia for IRL gatherings and flip phones and times when we had more free time and were able to hang out and be part of many different clubs in school. And if it's not measurable, it's really difficult to take seriously when you're talking with governments or companies and you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of investment. And so what we've built at the Chamber of Connection is a framework that is action focused rather than feeling focused. And the 6 points are a framework that you can use as an individual to build a more connected life, and they can be used at a city level or at a national level. And what they are that you should know your neighbors. You should be part of a community that's based around a shared identity, and also part of a community that's based around a shared interest area. You should have a third place, so somewhere besides home and work where you feel belonging. You should be part of a community that's based around giving back and volunteering. And you should have one-on-one connections that you can interact with at least once a week. And that's very action focused. You can build yourself a plan. You can look at how you can create improvement in your own life. And we can look at an infrastructure level at how we can make sure that we have third places in every neighborhood that are accessible for people, and make sure that we're supporting the grassroots effort so that there are social clubs and there are groups that people are able to interact with. And by making it measurable, we're able to bring more entities to the table to take connections seriously.
Talking about social infrastructure, the kind of public third spaces where people feel safe enough to have connection, to feel that they belong, to have agency and ownership, that's really important, but it also requires financing, and you touched on that, Charlotte. I think it's great knowing that capitalism, finance, funding is critical, and that happens in our cities in different ways, in different models, vehicles. But it's how we actually spend the money. And I think to make sure that we are doing it in a way that's credible, that's transparent, but also accountable, you can actually have our community really excited about what goes on, but also a part of it is influencing those who have money. And a big part in urban planning and of our cities and communities in creating that type of infrastructure is working with developers, private developers who are gonna be able to have capital, but also uplifts in terms of how they're transforming physically, what our city looks like and how people live. But you can also use that in a way to have levies that are actually socially beneficial based on these needs that's been identified. In Sydney, having to govern and look after $15.4 billion of assets, of public assets, that's really important in terms of not just creating capital expenditure and new things, but actually how do we maintain what's existing? How do we actually use what we have in terms of libraries and community centres and our skate parks and our community gardens, and actually ensure that they are inclusive? And community has a say, and they feel that they belong in these spaces, but also in terms of ensuring that you can champion those types of solutions in a way that is nuanced, that is contextual. We talked about place-based solutions regularly in this context because it has to be based on these sites, but going beyond just the red dashed lines of where people operate. It's about affordable housing. When we talk about attracting talent and building a strong economic engine for the country and attracting new talent and businesses in, we need to have the right public transport, active transport, to make sure people are living close to where they're working, to make sure that the existing communities are embedded, rather than creating isolated innovation precincts. How do we actually embed it to decentralize the innovation across the existing communities so that that kind of innovation, collaboration, the kind of water cooler moments can actually happen at an urban scale? And I think that's the type of connection that can happen if we're intentional in terms of how we're spending our infrastructure and creating those safe spaces.
Absolutely. And those physical environments are really important to how easy it is to connect socially. People often look back at their college years as a connected time in their life, and a lot of that is because you're living in a walkable neighborhood. You run into people in the dining hall in a way that you don't often as an adult, but there's no reason for that. We could create a city where that's possible. And if you're living in an area that's walkable, where you have friends who are a 10-minute walk away, it's a lot easier to spend time together after work or on your lunch break or before work starts. And we've built our cities in a way where that's challenging, but it doesn't need to be the case, and it's something that we can change. And that's really important for us to be able to envision what a connected city could actually look like in order for us to be able to build towards that. And all of this is really good for companies too, because when you're recruiting employees to move to your city, you want them to want to stay. And if it's a place where you want to live, then that's going to be a lot easier to do. And it's much more challenging if they're isolated and are facing those social harms of only being connected through their employment.
Absolutely, and I think that kind of connectivity you're talking about goes beyond just the physical, the kind of social connections. It's also about how people feel they belong to a place, how they feel they can actually contribute towards a city and a community's economic power. I think if we look at how we can continue to extract that kind of capital to serve our communities, and one example of this is, for example, in Sydney, in any development in central Sydney that is considered a major development, 1% goes to public art. Having a soul of our city is so important in terms of not just having culture, creativity, but also attracting that kind of talent, because we do want to live in places where there is emotions, where we can actually come together and share stories, but also be creative and actually be able to have those experiences rather than in an environment where it's just about making money. So I think if we can look beyond just creating commercial places, commercial cities, commercial-based communities, and actually see that companies also value this. They also value connection, they value vibrancy of a city, they value culture and nightlife. And having people being active and out and about, that's actually good for our cities, but we need good governance. We need mayors, we need local city politicians and council members actually being able to understand and listen to the experts. And those experts aren't politicians. Those experts are community members, our everyday citizens who have those lived experience, who are able to not only make decisions, but also see into the future in terms of what needs might be evolving and how to actually evolve with those types of new solutions for new generations to come.
Yeah, the goal is that we create a world where the default is connection, where you have to work to be lonely because you're going to run into people. There's volunteers who are bringing you baskets when you move to a new neighborhood, and you're asked to volunteer and be part of clubs. And also, there are things that you can do as an individual to make that happen for yourself. You make a place a third place by showing up there and getting to know the other people. And you make one-on-one friends by investing in them. We know that it takes on average 2 times meeting someone to know if they're a potential friend. It takes 6 times to feel comfortable, and it takes 200 hours to build a best friendship. And so if you feel like you don't have any best friends right now, you probably just haven't spent the hours. So figure out how you can take a weekend trip or find time more than 1 happy hour a month in order to get to that level. And the great thing about connection is that anything that you are doing to build connection for yourself is automatically building connection for someone else because you're connecting with another human. So I really encourage everybody to get out there. Here in this environment, there's tons of amazing people to meet. And also when you go home to your neighborhoods, be an activator, be a leader. And if you're interested, we have volunteer opportunities to make that easy, where you can meet other people who are interested in rebuilding the social fabric of our country.
So today we've talked about the trust economy and how we build trust through connections beyond just from a outlook that's focused on commerce, but also changing that understanding that these third spaces have to be safe, that they are physical infrastructure, but they're also emotional infrastructure. It's not just about the hardware. it's the software as well. So how we actually ensure that we are advocating to policymakers, to decision makers in a way that can ensure that our communities feel connected, that they're not isolated, but also that we can come together so that we can protect the very social fabric that makes our communities great.
Absolutely. It's about our humanity, and we need to save it.
Thank you so much, everyone.